This segment brought to you by Sure Crop, liquid crop nutrition delivered right to your farm.
We're back. Let's go to Duane, who is with Dr. Amelia Woolums. She explains how bacteria becomes resistant to multiple medications.
Duane Taves joining us once again here on Ag AM in Kansas, and an opportunity to catch up with Dr. Amelia Woolums from Mississippi State, talking about the feeder cattle industry and particularly the animal health side of it. We think about what some of the biggest challenges are in the feeder cattle industry, and unfortunately some bacteria that are becoming even harder to control than ever.
Yes, that's right, Duane. I talked today about some of the work others in our group at Mississippi State have done looking at multidrug-resistant Mannheimia haemolytica. It's a common bacteria that causes BRD in stocker and feedlot cattle. We often use antibiotics to control or treat Mannheimia haemolytica and other BRD bacteria. And for decades, they've worked pretty well. And to some degree, and to a large degree often, the cattle still seem to be doing okay. But we're starting to find that the bacteria contain genes that help them resist multiple classes of bacteria, of antimicrobials, all at the same time. And so we and others are looking at what are the factors that impact this multi-drug resistant state of these Mannheimia haemolytica, and how can we manage cattle to try to prevent proliferation of highly antibiotic resistant Mannheimia haemolytica.
Certainly for the general public, they hear about antibiotic resistance issues within the human population, but certainly in the livestock world, it's every bit as concerning, considering what the end game is.
Yes, that's right. We know that cattle can carry antibiotic-resistant bacteria and not necessarily get sick. But what we worry about is when they do get sick, will they now respond to the antibiotics? And that's why we're studying the factors that impact antibiotic resistance. Just like people are doing the same in human medicine, we're looking at it in the stocker cattle and the feedlot cattle.
Talk a little bit about how that resistance builds in a population of bacteria.
So what we know is that in any population of bacteria, and that might be millions or billions of bacteria, there will be a small number that are resistant. And when we use an antibiotic, the bacteria that are sensitive to the antibiotic will be killed, and that will just leave the resistant bacteria to proliferate, and then they become the dominant bacteria in our cattle or in their environment. It's true in any situation really where we're using antibiotics that some resistance will occur. What we always want to do is minimize the resistance.
Certainly we hear about some of the, from the crop world side, about rotating classes of chemistries and trying to eliminate resistance. As far as on the antimicrobials, are we able to see some benefits from that?
Duane, that's an excellent question. We would have said so probably 10 years ago, but what we're finding now is that the Mannheimia haemolytica have genes that are carry resistance to many different antibiotics at the same time. And so when we give cattle one antibiotic, we find then that we can isolate Mannheimia haemolytica that are resistant to multiple antibiotics that the cattle, as far as we know, haven't even received. And so what we're learning is that these bacteria can pick up really chunks of DNA that contain multiple genes that then they share with other bacteria, and that's most likely what's happened. So nowadays, when we give cattle one antibiotic, we find that they have resistance to multiple antibiotics, and so it may not always work to switch to another class of antibiotic.
So ultimately, it doesn't sound like great news, but where does the industry go from here?
Well, the message that we tried to give today is let's not panic. As I said, we sometimes isolate multidrug-resistant bacteria, and the cattle seem to do fine. But we know when resistant bacteria start to dominate in a situation or environment, just like people with MRSA. People might have heard stories about athletes who get infected with MRSA or other serious bacteria on benches in the locker room or on towels that they might share, and then they can have severe infections. The same might be true with our cattle. The more we have antibiotic resistance in the environment, the more our cattle could be at risk for problems. So the message we wanted to get across today is, while we wait for more research to figure out exactly what the important factors are, try to keep cattle healthy. Do what you can to provide a good environment for the cattle, proper housing, proper nutrition. Identify illness quickly. If you identify a cow in the early stage of infection, you don't need to use antibiotics as long as if you find the cow when it's into advanced disease. And use antibiotics as directed on the label, and work work with your veterinarian to use antibiotics the most wisely. Using antibiotics for the right duration of time, for the right situation, not using them just in case when you don't think a bacterial infection is really involved. Those are some of the things that we think will slow the proliferation of antibiotic resistance that has a negative effect on cattle health.
Our thanks to Amelia for joining us here on Ag AM in Kansas. Jamie, we'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Duane. Come back after the break for the Kansas Farm Bureau update.